Okay, well, good afternoon. We'll officially start. And I'm Josiah. If I haven't seen you before, I operate Be Amazing Interpreting. This afternoon, I am honored to have Dr. Carol Patrie with us. And I'm very much looking forward to spending the next couple of hours talking with Carol about her career in interpreting and interpreter education. Welcome again. Good afternoon. I hope and pray that you've had an amazing day and that you will glean much from today's presentation. I do want to thank Carol for being here with us this afternoon. I also want to take a moment quickly at the beginning to thank our ASL interpreters, Callista and Leah, who will be interpreting this afternoon's presentation. Thank you. I'll give a brief introduction to Carol shortly, but before I do, I wanted to give a little bit of logistic information for today's workshop, things that will be pertinent to you, specifically processing CEUs for today's workshop. About 30 minutes after today's presentation, you'll receive an email that's automatically generated from this event site called Luma, L-U-M-A, and that email will have two links. The first link will be for a CEU request form. All you'll have to do is click the link, fill out your information for which organization you're certified through, and I will process CEUs on my end. There will be a code word that you'll use to verify that you've attended today's presentation. I'll give that code word in the chat multiple times during this afternoon's presentation. I'll also give it verbally, and it will be interpreted into ASL. So make sure you keep your eyes and ears open for that code word, jot it down when you see or hear it, and then you'll put that onto the form to verify your attendance. The other link on the form will be an RAD evaluation link. That's optional, of course, but I always love to get your feedback on your experience today. I accept both positive feedback and feedback for improvement for future workshops. So those are the logistics for CEUs. I have had a couple of times in the past where people have said they did not get that email. If for some reason you don't get that email, please send me an email. And my email is josiah@beamazinginterpreting.com. I'll also type that in the chat later, but you should have that as well on your emails that you received confirmation for this afternoon's presentation. Again, I'm very excited about being with Dr. Carol Patrie for a couple of hours today. I'm honored. I always appreciate time that I get to spend with Dr. Carol Patrie. I've had the privilege of hearing Dr. Patrie present workshops several times in the past, and she's really become a friend of mine over the last few years, which has been gracious and really a blessing to my life. I know that what she shares with us this afternoon will be a blessing to you. And so without further ado, I want to give a little bit of background, a little bit of an intro to Dr. Carol Patrie. But today's workshop will focus mainly on her. So anything not covered in that brief introduction, I'm sure will come out as we continue our conversation. Lastly, before I introduce Carol, I do want to mention that many of you saw that this workshop was scholarshiped under the name of Stanley Patrie, who's Carol's father. She'll be talking more about him later and the rationale for that scholarship. But I do want to thank Carol for her generosity because it was Carol who scholarshiped those who were able to receive that scholarship. So real quickly, as I'm introducing Carol, if you would, or if you would like to, just type in the chat where you're zooming in from today. And also, if you want to just express gratitude to Carol for that scholarship, feel free to do that. And I'm very grateful for her generosity. So feel free to type some things in the chat. After that chat, mostly the chat will be quiet this afternoon until we ask you to put some more in the chat. Also, I do need to mention that there will be an opportunity for questions the last 25 to 30 minutes of today's presentation. So as we're moving forward, if something pops up that you're curious about, relevant to Dr. Carol Patrie's career and experience, if we could keep it within those bounds, that would be fantastic. you will have an opportunity to ask Carol that question at the end today. And I'll give you more information on how we'll do that later. I see in the chat, though, that we have people coming in from various places all over the United States. So great to see that. Some folks from DC and California and Maine, Florida, Ohio, Oklahoma, of course, whoop, whoop, Idaho. So thank you all for being here again. And Dr. Patrie, for most of us, is known in our field. It's I think impossible to be an interpreter without knowing her name and at least a portion of her contribution to interpreting and interpreter education. She's written the Effective Interpreting series, which most of us, again, are probably familiar with those series of textbooks, whether we learned from them or taught from them in our interpreting training programs. They're fantastic resources for teaching interpreting, not only interpreting theory, but also practice and evaluation. Carol is an independent researcher. She's done much independent research and writing. She's most well known for her research on fingerspelling and also teaching interpretation, of course. She is a former faculty member at Gallaudet University. She was a professor there, as well as the director of the Masters in Interpreting program at Gallaudet. While there, she received the Outstanding Graduate Faculty Award. Phenomenal. Again, we'll talk more about that too as we go on this afternoon. She's also on the editorial board for the IJIE, the International Journal of Interpreter Education, which we're mostly probably familiar with that, as well as the Journal of Interpretation. She's also the past president of CIT, and during that time was the recipient of the Mary Stotler Award. And of course, she authored the Effective Interpreting series, which I mentioned earlier. She also has developed a program called Fingerspelled Word Recognition through Rapid Serial Visual Presentation. Excuse me. So again, so honored to have Dr. Patrie here with us today. And I just want to say welcome, Carol. So good to see you this afternoon. I hope your day is going phenomenally. And to start, I believe you wanted to share some about your father and a little bit more about the Stanley Patrie Scholarship. Would you like to start there?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm just thrilled. What a great gig this is. Somebody asked you to talk about yourself for 2 hours. What could be better? I hope that you will each have some kind of takeaway, something that you can use in your own life, something maybe you picked up some idea from my life or from somebody else that maybe speaks today. I hope that you'll consciously be looking for a takeaway, something that you can apply in your own life. Um, Josiah did ask me why the Stanley Patrie Scholarship, and I just want to share a few slides about him so you can get an idea of who he is and why I wanted to share this with you.
Dr. Patrie, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a few that are saying that they're having a little bit of a difficulty hearing you. It could be a volume issue, but if it's possible to turn up the volume on your side in terms of microphone, that's great. If not,
Okay.
please continue and folks can adjust their volume on their end as necessary.
Okay, is this better? Is this better? Testing. Can you
That
hear me
sounds,
better?
to me, that sounds very good. And it looks like some people in the chat are saying it sounds good as well. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting me know. My dad was a deaf teacher of the deaf, so that's very rare, first of all, especially during the time that he was teaching. As you can see from the dates, he's passed away some time ago, but this picture really captures him. He's written on the board here behind his head the word fair. And he was a very fair person who loved teaching. And you can see he's got a little smile here. So some of the characteristics that I just want to mention about him are the characteristics that influence me, and I think are the characteristics that led to me encountering opportunities and then being able to use them. I think those are two different things. So he had curiosity, which I think is just a wonderful thing, you know. He's seated right here. He's seated at the chemistry bench there. And you can see by this age, maybe he's, I don't know, 19 or something, he's already got a tattoo going on. Which his mother did not approve of. So there's maybe a consistent theme about tattoos, I don't know. But he was very curious. He loved science. Here's an example of accepting opportunities that came along. This is in 1935. And there are 3 pictures that represent his little adventure climbing up the outside of the Washington Monument. On the left-hand side, you'll see the scaffolding. At that point, they were cleaning the outside of the Washington Monument. And one of Dad's classmates, his father was the supervisor. So he arranged to let these 3 college students and 2 teachers climb up the scaffolding to the top. And oops, sorry. This picture in the middle is a double exposure, but I just love this picture. You can see he's smiling in all the pictures. He's smiling, but he's there with his Graflex camera. He climbed up with this thing around his neck so that he would be able to touch the tip, which was at that time aluminum. So everywhere he went, you know, he would find little facts, and he would just be so excited about these facts that he found. And in the picture on the right, he's the one lower left, and behind him are some of the faculty members from Gallaudet. One of them is named Dr. Doctor. I don't know if you ever heard about Dr. Doctor, but there he is. There's a picture of him. So this points out the idea of encountering and then accepting opportunity. He had a great love of airplanes. As a deaf person, he couldn't get into the Army. He was listed as 1F. He couldn't get into the service, listed as 1F, and he really regretted that his whole life. He would say, I was 1F, I couldn't serve, but he loved aviation in any case, especially biplanes. I should have pulled out my model from the shelf to show you, but he made biplanes as a young man and got to fly in one as an older person. And even later, he and my mom got to fly in a biplane, and he just, thought that was wonderful. He was just so excited about the opportunities that came to him. And he wanted to share them. And I noticed that's true about me. I noticed that a lot of opportunities come to me, but I often feel like they weren't really meant to be mine. I can see who they could be passed to. So encountering opportunities, accepting opportunities, and then being willing to pass them along. I think those are ideas maybe think about, see if they can apply to you. Here he is, still smiling. By this time, he has met another Gallaudet student, my mom, beautiful red hair. He thought that he had just absolutely won the lottery when he met her, and he felt that way his whole life. I don't know if you can see, but in the picture with the car, there's a little rainbow for the car. There's a rainbow there. And of course, he didn't know that was behind him, but that just really summarizes, like, he got this, just the best thing that could ever happen to him. He had a car and he had this beautiful woman, and they got married, and they moved at the top of the Washington Monument, by the way.
Wow.
They got married and they moved to the Baton Rouge School for the Deaf. And they were so poor, they didn't have a spoon between them. My father came from poverty. He was very, very, very poor as a child. The only reason he wound up as prosperous as he did was because he was deaf. So not all adversity is bad. sometimes adversity really strengthens you. His family had zero money. He lost his hearing. His father died. So he hung around the town with his mother until the state of New York found out that there was a kid not in school. So they came and got him and put him in the Malone School, Malone, in New York State. And because he was because he was deaf, he had the opportunity to go to school, to have clothing and food and education and earn money and friends and go to Gallaudet and meet my mother, you know. So all these things that might have been perceived as adversity, he saw them as bonuses. He was taken to a faith healer. Maybe you've heard about faith healers.
Sure.
And he was taken to a place in Canada, and they put, holy oil in his ears and told him to pray. And then the healer told my father he didn't have enough faith, therefore he could not have his hearing restored. And my father was like, oh, well, the best thing about that trip was that they had cold milk and bologna sandwiches. Can you believe that? So, it just typifies the environment that I grew up in. It was like, wow, what's happening next? How can we take advantage of this? How can we share the information? This is where Dad taught. This is the Rochester School for the Deaf, and his science classroom is in the center of the building on the top floor. And our house was just a few feet away from the school. You probably know that the Rochester School for the Deaf used the Rochester method. Finger spelling only, only. No signing at all, ever. So if you're on that grass in front of the school, you're finger spelling. In our house, we could sign, but not on the driveway or on the lawn or in the school. At that time, they were very strict. And when Dad would be teaching, their supervising teacher would go up and down the hall, making sure nobody was finger spelling, nobody was signing. He would wait until the supervising teacher got past the door, and then he would sign like crazy to his students to help them understand science. It was more, he would have lost his job for sure if he had been caught. But he wanted his students to share his passion for science. So he was willing to go out on a limb to get the message across, to help them understand science. So that's another thing another legacy that I carry is my love of teaching, because I was able to go to his classroom and watch him teach. So here I am at the Rochester School for the Deaf. Apparently I was born with glasses, as far as I can tell. It's cold in Rochester, lots of snow. Those are my two brothers. I chose this picture to show you the context that my mother brought to me. She's the person in the center with the corsage, and she was Canadian. And when this picture was taken was the day that she became a US citizen. And I'm sort of right there, that little kid, that's me. And all of these people in this picture only fingerspelled. There was no signing at all. So that's my whole context, was just fingerspelling. And even though she was from another country, she kind of became like a leader in this group. This person on the very far left was my babysitter on the very rare occasions that my parents went out. This woman over here. There were no phones, right? No way for deaf people to communicate. So if I had an earache, which I often did, my parents would just get me in the car, drive across town, knock on her door and say, "She's sick. Can you take care of her?" And she'd go, "Oh, yes. Oh, good. Let me have the kid." So I got this other thread of generosity, of people helping each other. These things were all kind of woven into me without me really thinking about it. And when Josiah asked me to talk about myself today, I was looking for themes, like how did I get here? What were the winds that were blowing in my favor? I was a student in a college near Rochester, and my parents came to my college and they said, "Ntid is going to open like tomorrow, and they need interpreters. Why don't you go?" And I said, "Sure." Packed up my stuff. Well, before I did that, I called Ntid. I spoke to the head there. I said, "Hi, I have deaf parents." And he said, "Great, come to work tomorrow." That was my first job interview. And so like within a week, I was a full-time interpreter in a technical college with no training as an interpreter, except, what I interpret for my parents. And also all those signs that I knew, they were in the back of my head, and I knew that it was very wrong to sign in public. So I started my job by fingerspelling everything. And those poor deaf students, oh, their eyes were just like in great distress. So I realized that I knew the signs. I just had to get them up, up where I could use them. After 1 year, my boss said, "Good job. Now you can start teaching interpreting." And so I'm like, oh. So far, there's two examples of opportunity coming to me. I was just a college student minding my own business. And somebody said, "Hey, you want to be an interpreter?" And I said, "Sure. I don't know how to do that, but if you think I can do it, I guess I'll figure it out." And then the same thing with teaching. I'm like, "Well, if you think I can do it, I'll figure it out." This was what NTID looked like in 1968. That was the year I started interpreting. Much later, I became a faculty member at Gallaudet in the interpreting department. I chose this picture to show you because this is a picture of Davies House, Daws. And this is where the interpreting department was located. I know that there's at least one former Gallaudet interpreting program student here, so they're probably hopefully enjoying this particular picture. This tower, the top window here, that was originally the nurse's office. And when my father was in college, that was his bedroom. And then later, it was my boss's office, and mine was right over here in the infirmary. So Davies House has a lot of significance for me. When I started at Gallaudet, it was an associate's program. And we'll talk more about the master's degree in a little bit. After I left Gallaudet, I developed the Effective Interpreting series. So that's kind of the framework, and the idea behind all of this is opportunities came to me. I was curious about them. I took the opportunities, and sometimes I had to backfill. Like I didn't necessarily have all the tools I needed. I had to go get them and really scramble sometimes to get those new tools in place. I'll stop screen sharing. So that's a very long answer to why Stanley Patrie uh, uh, scholarship was included here, because he was a big influence in my life, and he has a lot of the characteristics that I would like to acknowledge and then maybe share with you, so that maybe you can take a couple pages from his book.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And I believe obviously relevant not only to your influence and leadership in interpreting. Clearly, you came from your parents, and that was the milieu that you were raised in. And interesting, I think several compelling themes that you mentioned. That not all diversity, or not all adversity is bad. It can be opportunity for growth. It can be opportunity for good things. It seems to me as if, just like the story of the faith healer praying for your father, the positivity that he had about life and opportunity and being who he was and doing what he would do fully, and really investing into that. And so kind of drilling down on those themes, as well as generosity, which you mentioned, generosity of the people around you. Just in my experience, I see those exemplified in your work and just what you put out with the people that you're around, how you lead when you present, things like that. But I would like to hear maybe more about that from you, and how your early life influences influenced how you approached your work later in life, whether you think maybe consciously or even subconsciously those things were instilled and then utilized in your career. Does the question make sense?
I think so. Let's see if the answer answers the question, and then we'll see if I understood the question. Um, I think being charged with the responsibility and given the opportunity to interpret for my parents was really formational for me. I can remember one instance when Dad needed to renew his driver's license. I must have been about maybe 5 or 6, less than 7, so 5 or 6. We drove to the fire station to get the new license, and the man there said, no, 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 no. Deaf and dumb people can't drive, so no. And I knew instantly in my little 6-year-old body that that information was not going to go to my father. First of all, I resented the way he talked about him. And secondly, I was like, we drove here. What are you even talking about? So I said to my father, oh, he says you can't drive. And my father laughed. He goes, oh, that is so funny. Oh, this guy's a riot. Here's my license. Can I get a new one? So then they got along famously. So I got the idea early on that I didn't know the word power, but I realized at some level that I could influence the outcomes of conversations by what I did with the information and how I felt about the information. So we now know that that's, a filter. You interpret your information through your own filters. Everybody does. But then how to do that as a professional where I wasn't filtering out information and just trying to remain true to the message. I think I did a pretty good job with that professionally, but as I went along with my mother, later in life, we'd drive up to the bank and the woman in the teller would be slow. And my mother would always thought I knew stuff that I didn't know. She said, well, why is she being so slow? And I said, oh, her computer's broken. So I just, So I continued to sort of broker information with my parents sometimes, but professionally, I was able to experience a difference between rendering the message I wanted someone to have and allowing them the right to have the information that was meant for them. So did I answer the question?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Just just this idea that that clearly the influence from your father and the upbringing with your surroundings and your environment obviously instilled within you these I don't know, principles or values, just ways to approach life that clearly were also applied to your career. And in understanding the deaf community, the deaf world in a very specific type of way. I didn't grow up with any deaf family members, for example. Most of us who are interpreters don't. And so to have that, I think for us to have an understanding of how those influences are so vital to the work that comes later in understanding what the deaf experience is, what good leadership values and principles are needed. And so as long as I've been aware of your work, I've just always been inspired by the way that you do what you do. And so, and I guess I'll say this just as a kind of a contextualization of our broader conversation, which is, our potential for leadership presently and in the future, I believe is contingent upon us learning from our past and the leaders who have come before us, and not just what they've done or what they've produced, but some of the why behind that. Why did they do the work that they've done? How did they approach leadership opportunities when they came about? What values and principles did they employ in leading? And those are the things I'm interested in because I believe it's pertinent to the future of leadership in interpreting and interpreter education. So that's to contextualize not only that question, but just our broader conversation. So moving, I guess, a little bit forward from the upbringing piece into early interpreting education. You had the unique privilege that many of us on today's call, although I won't say exclusively, there might be some on today's call who were around at that time. But myself being one, and I believe most of us, we didn't have, the privilege of experiencing those early moments, what education looked like. Some of us may have read about that, in books or heard from people about that, but I would love to hear about that from you. So what did early interpreting education look like? Obviously, there would be shortcomings at that time because lack of formalization, it was really the trailblazing period of interpreting education. And I think often we do look disparagingly as a whole on that time. Maybe not all of it, but I think we tend to say, oh, well, that was when it was very, very low level and people weren't properly prepared. And probably that's true. I mean, obviously it's most cases probably true, but were there things that were sparks of ingenuity, sparks of creativity that blaze the trail for where we are today, or anything around that topic that you would like to talk about?
When I became an interpreter educator, I used that term very loosely at that time in 1969. It was basically a vocabulary and using signs and sentences. I had no idea. And my job was to train 6 new interpreters for the following semester. So I had like 8 weeks in the summer to help them become better interpreters or to become interpreters. So it was like just throwing spaghetti against the wall, like anything I could think of to help them. I tried, and I don't even, I was so scared, so terrified that I don't remember what the specific techniques were because I hardly knew how to interpret myself at that point. It was just, really the school of hard knocks and trial by fire. And everybody thought I was doing a good job, probably just because I was doing the job. I don't I don't think it was a good job. I was just trying to help, you know. Um, as the years went along, I continued to have opportunities to teach. And I looked around and I saw that many of my colleagues were just the same as me. They had deaf parents, and then overnight they became interpreters. And then overnight they became interpreter educators. If you can interpret, you have deaf parents, you can teach interpreting. And you also know how to put together an interpreter education program. It was just a bunch of us who were just thrown in. There's a huge need here. We think you can do it. So let's get it done. And I wasn't alone. There were many other codas who had the same experience. And we kind of found each other through CIT, Conference of Interpreter Trainers. We found each other there, started sharing ideas, tried to break down what are the components of teaching, interpreting. A lot of people involved, not me, just it was like a team effort. Lots of people involved in figuring out, well, before we figure out how to teach, we have to figure out what just interpreters need to know. So we kind of had to back it down. There's a lot that's been written about analyzing the tasks related to interpreting. It was a group effort. There were lots of us working on it. So we were all feeling our way along. There was a great urgency, though, because there was already legislation in place, 94, 142, and all the legislation that came down that said interpreters must be provided here and here and here and here and here. There was no legislation that said interpreter education must be provided. Training for educators must be provided. Curriculum development must be provided. None of that was in place. So we were all just scrambling and just swimming as hard as we could, because we knew that our efforts would help deaf people gain access to the information. And we were all just very seriously dedicated to it, just working long hours trying to figure it out. By this time, I had a faculty position at Gallaudet, and it was an AA program, an Associate of Arts program. And my department chair said, "So how's this working?" And I said, "It's really not. I can't get the job done in 2 years, teach ASL and teach, I can't get it done in 2 years." So we decided to design a bachelor's in interpreting, and this was in 1986. And we got a whole bachelor's ready and took it to the Senate at Gallaudet, and they said, "No way, no, 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 no. You want to have ASL for credit as part of a bachelor's degree? No, not happening." And so we're like, "Oh my gosh, this can't happen at Gallaudet." So we took an end run and designed a master's in interpreting, which would allow me to get the job done in 2 years if the person already had, ASL fluency and some education at the bachelor's level. Then, we could really, me and the other faculty could could have graduates who could actually do the job. So I think those are all examples of opportunities that came to me that I didn't know how to solve, but there were other people in the network, other people trying to address the same problems, solve the same problems. We were all looking for answers at the same time. When the day came to defend the masters at the Gallaudet Senate, you might be surprised to learn how much resistance there was. The faculty senate, we like, why would an interpreter need a graduate degree, let alone any degree, really? Just tell me what they said. You don't need all this education. So it gave me a really good opportunity to think hard about what's the way to sell this idea? Why is it so obvious to me and not to the end users? So it gave me a good chance to think about how to talk about interpreter education. And by the time that master's was up and running, I realized, oh, we have just hit the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more. But at least then we had a framework in place.
Were you surprised by the response from the Synod at Gallaudet? And tag on to that, it seems as if that optimistic angle is something you applied to their response, which is hearing what they're saying, and then how can I reframe what I'm doing to be more effective in moving this forward?
It took me a long time for to understand the need for the master's myself as I built it. And then I realized, well, the people that I'm presenting it to that I have to convince, they don't know. It's so there's no use in
Right.
being angry with them or anything. I felt that that was a teaching opportunity for
Hmm.
me to help them understand why interpreters need to be qualified, how to get them qualified, how education fits into the qualifications. So that was one of my greater challenges, was getting that passed.
What did you love about those early days? Probably incredibly challenging, lots of uh, new, unknown things, frustrations, things like that. What did you love? What did you love about those early times?
I love that there was no wrong answer.
Uh,
Because when you have a blank canvas and you need to get the job done, and they've asked you to do it and nobody else is doing it, there's kind of no wrong answer. Just get started, and then you can start to refine it after that.
so to hone in on some of these groundbreaking opportunities that you've had to build programs, to present concepts of curriculum and programs. Let's talk a little bit more about those opportunities. And they were significant, which is an understatement. These defining moments, really, for, I'm sure, not only your career, but defining moments for the future of interpreter education. And um, you've talked about the fact that they were somewhat unexpected. They were opportunities that came to you, but then as you, I guess, nurtured those opportunities, took action, presented these proposals, created programs, what's happening now, and how did that not only impact what you saw happening in interpreting education more broadly, because I'm sure that it did, but also what was the impact on you?
Um, I loved it. I loved it. I knew that I was very fortunate. I knew that opportunities came to me, materials, resources, things just came to me. And then by this time, I had a big enough network so that I could see, oh, this person could use this and this person could use that. Um, it was really hard work. It was long hours, hard work, but I really loved it because I felt like I'm well positioned through. I mean, just because I said yes to the next opportunity, I became well positioned. It wasn't something that I sought. I definitely did not seek any of that happened to me. Um, I feel like I was saying earlier, I had to kind of backfill. Like, I was given this wonderful opportunity to change the face of interpreter education, and then I needed to really scramble and backfill. So I had to really study what's interpreting about. I dove into the field of spoken language interpreting because there's really no need to reinvent the wheel. So I studied everything I could get my hands on about interpreting. I joined organizations for spoken language interpreters. I read the research that they were reading. I became friends with some of them, some names you might remember. I really dove into the spoken language interpreting because I saw that they already had programs at the master's levels, and they were already training interpreters with 2 or more languages. So I undertook the study, and then I realized in order for me to have the credibility, I needed to have the terminal degree. I needed to have a doctorate myself, so that I could sell the ideas better. You know, people would take me more seriously if I had that terminal degree. So I felt that was an example of the backfilling. I didn't have those credentials, I didn't have the information, but I could see that I would need them. So that was like backfilling while pedaling forward at the same time. Did that answer your question?
It sure did, absolutely. And you alluded to this in your response, some of the people that you were able to connect with along your journey. And so many fields, not just interpreting, I think this applies very broadly, that connections are very important to not only opportunities in one's work, and oftentimes they're formational types of relationships. And so would you be willing to talk a little bit about the people you've been able to connect with over the years, work alongside, meet, that were formational for you, so key connections, and why they were so important?
Yes. Before I do that, should I try plugging in the headset? I see people are still
Yeah,
having.
we can try that. I think several have had some issues with volume. I can hear you just fine, but yeah, we do have some folks that are having a difficult time. So let's try that.
Let me see it. One second. Okay, now I have the headset on. Is that for people that are listening to the spoken English? Is that better? I'll keep doing some test talking here. I see some thumbs up. Is that better? Okay. Yes. Okay. Good. 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 Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay. Now I've distracted myself. What was the question? Oh, how have my colleagues influenced me?
Yeah,
Was that it?
yeah, just the idea of some of the key connections you've made in over the years. Why were they so
Oh,
important, and how were they formational for you? What
okay.
types of things opened up from those connections?
Um, One of my earliest was Sharon Newman Solo. Probably many of you know her. She and I were interpreters together at Ntid, and she had 1 more year of experience than I did. So she was helping me, with learning how to do that, and I was helping her with learning how to, be in Rochester. Um, so she was one of my most uh, formational early colleagues, and she still is. We're still in very close touch, close collaboration. When I got to the place where I was an interpreter educator, the other interpreter educators who were codas and I became very reliant on each other because we knew how to do it. We knew how to interpret, but we didn't know how to get the ideas across to other people. And none of us could have done it alone. We all really needed each other. It was a very small group. We just shared, ideas that we could find. I found a lot from spoken language interpreting. I brought those in. We had what they called share shops, and they'd have a small group of interpreter educators come together and just share ideas. It was great. Um, that's where I first began to develop a sense of community with other educators. And I felt so relieved because I knew that, my boat is so small and the ocean is so big, but these other people have boats too. So I felt like, oh, phew, I don't have to figure it all out. I have colleagues that can help me with that. As I moved into uh, more academic life, I didn't ever actually have a mentor. I would like to have somewhere along the way said, I have a mentor, but I didn't. So I took little bits and pieces from different people along the way without even realizing it. Like the day that I defended that the Master of Arts at the Senate, I said something like there are about so many interpreters. And this woman who was a dean came up to me afterwards and she said, never say about, just pick a number. Just pick a number. Because if you say about, it sounds like you don't know for sure. And other people that I worked with were good writers, and they would say, always start with an outline, or teach to the student that has the most trouble in the room. Don't teach to the brightest student, teach to the student who's struggling the most, and the rest of them will benefit. Um, don't meet, here was one, I just picked up things from different people, like, don't meet with a group of angry students. Meet with one angry student at a time. Don't meet with a group of angry people.
I love that one.
That turned out to be really useful. Always double check your references, your citations. It's okay if you need a little more time, but make sure you got it right if you're going to put it out there and for other people to read. Not so much that you don't want to be found out as wrong, but because if you rush through putting some information out there, it could be harmful to someone else, and someone might build on your work. So the people that worked with me, I really say work with me, because even the people that I supervised helped me, because I saw, oh, that's not a good way to supervise this person, or I have to find a way to have that person understand the importance of what I need them to do, not just because I'm asking them to do it. So I feel like I took little bits of information from colleagues, from people who were farther along in their academic careers, from students. I started to see, in a group of students, like which student do I need to separate from the rest? And that happened my first year of teaching. I came in the middle of a cohort, and this group was pretty out of control. And there was one that was kind of the ringleader. So I was brand new. I had no idea what to do. So I called her out in the hall. And I said, what is your problem exactly? And she never gave me any more trouble. And the whole class became, just wonderfully cooperative. And she is still one of my very dearest friends today. Wow. So, I just pick up little pieces as I go along, so that I could maybe figure out how to help the next student who's floundering, or the next new teacher who wants to get started.
So I'd like to transition into talking about the effective interpreting series here in a moment. I do want to remind the participants, we will have a Q&A time. They'll last about 25 minutes of this afternoon, so in about 30 minutes or so. So if you have questions, burning questions, or just curiosity questions for Dr. Patrie, please keep those handy. And I believe what we'll do is probably use the chat function at that point, just because I'm not sure how to do the Q&A thing. So, but keep those questions handy. But as you all think about those questions, again, that'll be in about 30 minutes. I do want to talk a bit about the effective interpreting series, and then transition into your thoughts on interpreter education today. where we are and where you think we might be headed. But the Effective Interpreting series, again, no small contribution to interpreting education. I've taught from them. I think they're beautiful texts. I think they're incredibly useful, very helpful. And so tell us, I guess, a bit about how did this project even begin? And why did you go on this journey? And I know that it took many years. I don't remember the total number of years, with the last volume published in 2019. Is that right?
I think so. They all kind of blend together.
Yeah. But yeah, tell
Yeah.
us more about that, if you would.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen to help me make that point. This is what the Effective Interpreting series looks like. It's meant to build from language proficiency, the blue, meaning really skilled in ASL and English. English was a hard sell. It was hard to get people to believe that they needed to improve their English skills. So the whole pyramid has 2 books for each level: cognitive processing from ASL and from English, translating from ASL, translating from English, consecutive from ASL, consecutive from English, simultaneous ASL, simultaneous English. So there's 10 books altogether. And this idea started forming in my head basically on the first day that I taught at Gallaudet in 1984, I think, because every night I was scrambling around like, oh, where am I going to get a videotape to help me make this point? Or, what kind of homework can I devise? Oh, the students don't have videos. How can I give homework? How can they practice? Everything relied on what I could do in the classroom. They had nothing to study, no textbooks. And because of that, from the 80s and the 70s, it's still been a hard sell to get interpreter education programs to require textbooks. I mean, it's shifting, but that was a hard sell. So 2 things that might be surprising. It was hard for people to believe they needed to study English, and it was hard for them to believe that they needed to buy textbooks and study. As I continued teaching, I started to realize, it's jumping too far ahead to ask a student to translate if they don't really have those 2 languages well in place. So through experience and through trying to find materials to teach with, through seeing students that had a lot of potential but not enough materials to work with, and by seeing that other colleagues had the same struggles, and how many videos can we share with each other, then it started to fall into place, and then it all clicked into place in one instant. I was in San Diego visiting my parents, and this whole thing that you see on this screen just clicked into my brain just in an instant. I just kind of like a flash of understanding of how it would all fit together. I was very close. I was within a couple miles of DSP, Dawn Sign Press, at that time. So I got an appointment. I went over there, and I knew the president because when he graduated from college, I gave him a teaching job teaching sign language. So we kind of knew each other. It was a small world. And he didn't really look into this right away. And I thought, maybe it's not so good. But then he did see the paper, and he did understand my name, and he didn't necessarily know what I was doing. But he said, oh, you? Yes, of course, let's do it. So we worked from 1995 until 2000 creating the videos for these books. All of them are naturalistic signing. They're not rehearsed or scripted. It's just how people would sign or how people would talk. And so Dawn Sign Press has been with me, working with me now since 1995 to create the videos and to publish each of the 10 books. And in more recent good news, there are a lot of videos left that we didn't use that we will be putting out very soon, video on demand. And in the video library at Gallaudet, some wonderful footage that you'll soon be able to access. Just to say a little bit more about this sequence of skills, I realized that the purple one, translation, that was really missing. And I feel like that's kind of the heart and soul of interpreting. If you can give yourself or give your students the time and the guidance and the input, the feedback, to just take your time and take a message in ASL and work out what are the possible things it could mean in English. And then what are the possible ways you could say that? And then run it by somebody else. Start to build team skills, working with another interpreter by sharing translations, just working with small units, like a paragraph. I feel like if people build up their confidence in their ability to maintain message equivalence, then the other skills, consecutive and simultaneous, will have a much better chance of being faithful to the message. So translation skills was another hard sell. So textbooks was hard, English was hard, translation was like, what are you even talking about? So, but over time, people are using them more and more. I still find that as hard as we work to get these out, as soon as we got them all out, everything changed to digital. So now we're trying to keep up with, making these materials available digitally.
Right. What was this process like for you? So personally, for Carol Patrie, going through the process of embarking on this really massive project, were you able to see the implications of what you were doing? And, were there ever times you felt, should I have started this? I don't know. I don't know how vulnerable you'd want to be about that process, but I'm curious to know, again, blazing a trail, writing curriculum when there wasn't really curriculum out there, a lot of new things and challenges other people hadn't really taken on in the same way. So what was it like for you?
It was kind of like uphill both ways. um, I I love doing it. I love writing. I love finding videos that make a certain point, to help a certain lesson. I love creating, the exercises that go with that video to make this point. I love doing it. It's very, very time consuming, but I really, really enjoyed writing, finding those videos, putting it all together. The hardest part for me was getting the ideas and information across to other
Mm.
interpreter educators.
Mm.
That's been the biggest stumbling block. Writing just takes time. There was a period where I was able to get out a book a year, but I wasn't able to maintain that over time. Yeah, the hardest part was convincing other people, other educators and other interpreters, that they could benefit from having books that they could study on their own. And people
Right.
are still even reluctant, like, oh, I don't want to ask my students to buy books. So, so for me, I think my biggest frustration was getting the awareness of the effective interpreting series out to other people. That's been my biggest frustration. But other than that, I love doing it.
And I'd like to transition here in a moment more to where we're at today and your thoughts on where we are and where we're headed. But also just to plug on the effective interpreting series, didn't Dawn Sign Press make a lot of the videos available now digitally for those who are using the text today?
Yes, yes. All of the effective interpreting series videos are now available digitally. So there's a code in the back of your book, and that will allow you to access the digital version of any DVD that you already own.
Yes, that's wonderful. And somebody commented in the chat, and also for the RSVP program, which we didn't talk much about yet. But those are also, that's also now digital as well.
Yes, yes, the computer program for fingerspelled word recognition,
Yes.
that computer program and the video, they're both available digitally now. So we're very excited about that. Our next big project, looking ahead, is to um, do what Dawn Sign Press has done with Signing Naturally,
Mm,
which is putting the lessons and everything online. So we're working on that now. um, how to package the individual modules in the effective interpreting series so that they could fit into Canvas or Blackboard, you know.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And I know, I mean, technology, just rapid light speed changes. So keeping up, is, I'm sure for anybody in publication, writing, and all of that, it's just a whirlwind of updates and integrations. And somebody mentioned Go React integration and all of that. And so I know it's a changing landscape. I just love that Dawn Sign Press is actively evolving with technology. So that's great to see.
Yeah. Yeah, it took we do have a partnership now with Go React. And just to let you know, it took about 3 years of behind the scenes work to get that partnership in effect. So
Wow. No,
I'm glad it's available now, though.
no small effort. So let's I guess move forward to today. Where are we at now in interpreting education? Um, just thoughts from you on where we are, what you see out there happening, um, and then also where we're headed. Maybe any changes you see that we will be making, or maybe if you ruled the world, changes that you would implement in interpreting education, just anywhere along those lines that you'd like to talk about.
Well, now that there's a program to accredit interpreter education programs now. So with that in effect, that's helping to achieve some kind of, not standardization, but like it's an accreditation. So a program that meets the accreditation guidelines has, certain characteristics. So that's helpful. That's helpful in, increasing the quality standards for education. Um, I think that in general, the trend is moving toward really requiring or putting a greater emphasis on the language proficiency before interpreting. We just can't escape it. It'll never go away. We have to have fluency in 2 languages before interpreting. And that's been a hard sell because for many years, people really didn't take it very seriously. Like, you want to be an interpreter? Okay, good. um, but we know it's not really enough. We really do have to have the language proficiency in place. I think we're moving more, especially after having gone through a global pandemic. I think that interpreter education has had to pivot very quickly to virtual learning. I think it's too early to know how successful that's becoming, but it had to happen. And I think many of my colleagues were very nimble and able to pivot as quickly as they could. Thank goodness there were already platforms like Canvas, Blackboard, Go React. So there was a way to still be in touch with students. I think that trend will continue to have more distance learning. I don't know if that's a good thing, but I think that will continue. The piece that cuts out is the interaction, and you just can't undervalue that. Interpreters need to be able not only to interact with deaf people, but how to interact with hearing people. That's often overlooked, but
Sure.
your professional demeanor, how do you present yourself? Those things are hard to achieve virtually. So I think it probably will be um, more emphasis on uh, finding ways to have students achieve that interaction if you don't have face-to-face interaction in the classroom or on campus. I think that there will be an increasing demand for interpreters who can work virtually, not just be trained, but
Mm.
virtual, like video relay type work or VRI.
Mhm.
I think there's a big demand there. It seems to be growing. Um, it's probably some great big change right around the corner that we can't even see yet. But people still need to communicate with each other, and interpreters are really good problem solvers. And I think there are unforeseen problems, but I feel like, we'll be able to figure it out.
Out of curiosity, which programs do you keep your eye on in terms of interpreter training, whether bachelor's or master's level programs or even PhD programs? Do you keep your eye on certain programs around the country that you kind of try to track what's happening there, who's instructing, what they're using?
Not so much right now.
Okay.
Many of the people that were my immediate colleagues, many of them have retired, and I don't necessarily know who their successors are. Um, I keep my ear to the ground, but I haven't really had any face-to-face interaction or in-person interaction with a lot of different programs right now. I do I do provide consulting work to programs, but at a distance, so I don't get to like physically see what's there.
Mm.
I'm curious, but I don't know.
Yeah. Uh, and what do you feel like interpreters who are being trained presently need? Um, I, I'm sure you you can't give an exhaustive list, but what are the top things that come to your mind? What do we need?
Um, Problem solving skills.
Hmm.
Interpreting is like one big set of problems that need to be solved in an instant, and they're never the same two set of problems. Whether you're an interpreter educator or an interpreter, you just need to be able to be quick on your feet and figure out which of the tools that I have with me today will work for this. Like every time I go to teach someplace, there's as many times as I've done it, there's always something, a new problem, like one time I checked they had all the equipment that I needed and the seats and the lights and everything. But the place where you plug, you know, your device into the wall, it was a hole. There was no plug. So there was no way, you know. Um, so we just, there will always be problems that interpreters have never seen before. And so I'm trying to get away from the idea of being resentful that things weren't the way your teacher said they were going to be,
Sure.
because they won't be. So just having that sense of, like curiosity, how can I solve this problem? Man, who can I get to help me solve this problem? So, the flexibility to say, I don't know the answers, but somebody could help me. Um, I think one of the things that has been missing all along is the ability to actually practice interpreting, not when you're
Mhm.
working,
Right.
but practice when you're not working. How do you translate this? How do you read this finger spelling? This deliberate practice that is the mark of many very successful people like musicians and actors. They're practicing like crazy before they get out there to perform. So I think of that as something that historically has been missing, but we could easily build it in and build yourself a little 20-minute practice session a couple days a week.
Absolutely. And I feel like practice has been talked about more the last few years, possibly. I see some workshops. I've been to some on deliberate practice, and I absolutely agree. Practice is essential for top level performance in anything. And you were sharing with me earlier, actually, some things about practice that you had looked into before today's conversation. I didn't know if you wanted to share that with the group or not.
I would, yes, thank
Okay.
you. So deliberate practice is something that's being talked about quite a bit right now. So if you did want to become a better interpreter, going to more jobs isn't really the way to get there. It's really through deliberate practice, and it has very specific parameters. So here's a quick question. After 100 hours, which of these people would be a better shooter? This person A, 200 shots. Somebody else goes and retrieves the ball. The other person keeps track of the whole thing. B has 50 shots, 50 practice shots. He gets his own shot, goes and picks up the ball, dribbles back, leisurely thinks. The answer is B, because this person is taking time to think about what they're doing. They're taking accountability. They go get the ball. So these two refer to practice. So this is not when you're at work doing interpreting. This is when you've decided to give yourself a 20-minute practice period on a Tuesday. If you're just practicing over time, you will get better, but it'll level off. If you're using deliberate practice, your progress continues to get better. So deliberate practice will include these things: doing the task, rest and reflect, look back on your work, practice it again. The thing that you're practicing needs to be directly related to the skill. So for example, if you want to work on, some people call it voicing. I'm going to stay away from that term because voice isn't a language, and we work between two languages, ASL and English. So I like to just talk about it that way. So people sometimes say they want to improve their voicing. Well, really, if you unpack that, it's really they want to improve their skills going from ASL to English. Okay, so then going from ASL to English begins with ASL comprehension. And then let's take it one step further. Let's take it to understanding fingerspelling. Then you've got a very specific thing to study. You can study fingerspelled word recognition. That's not doing the fingerspelling. That's only reading the fingerspelling. So that's like a tiny building block of being able to improve your skills working from ASL to English. So that the practice has, the thing you choose to practice on has to be part of the larger skill, and has to be something that you can do for, like 20 minutes is good. That's plenty. Not studying hours and hours at a time. You get too tired and it's not that beneficial. So stop share. So deliberate practice, you can find lots of information about that. The work that Josiah mentioned about fingerspelled word recognition, that's a perfect one for deliberate practice. Also, the Effective Interpreting series is built around the idea of deliberate practice. You can study like, one unit in one book, take one lesson out of that one unit and study that, maybe study with another person to build, a peer relationship. So deliberate practice is something that every person can do for themselves. When I'm not doing this kind of thing, I like to work on some other things. Like I have a glass studio in my basement. And if I want to get where I want to go, I want to be able to create these landscapes with glass powder. And right now, I'm not doing too well with that because I'm not going down to the basement and practicing it. I'm working on another one of my skills, which is landscaping. So I have lots of things that I want to do better at, but I know I've got to put in the time.
to get better at them.
That's really good. Thank you. So again, just a reminder, we'll open up Q&A here in just a few minutes. I have a couple more questions, thoughts before we get into the broader Q&A. And so just hold those questions in your head or on a piece of paper next to you until that time. So in terms going back to where kind of where we're headed with interpreting education, and there are changes that are happening all the time. Of course, technology is a big one. We talked about that. Curriculum is a big one. Training for interpreting education is a big one. In terms of your career, where you're at today, I know you do present and at conferences and workshops. And of course, still engage with the Effective Interpreting series and consulting. What's the work right now that is really the most, I guess, precious to you in terms of your contribution to interpreting education today and moving forward?
If I had to pick one thing, I think it would be for me to somehow get with the deaf interpreter educators and people who are training to be CDIs, because I don't know that they know about EIS, but I think it would be very helpful for them to make their lives easier. The EIS is meant to make people's lives easier, but I don't know that everybody who would like to use it knows about it. So I think we need to, encourage and build access, or maybe that's not the right word, just build stronger partnerships with deaf interpreter educators and, deaf interpreters right now. So there's, that's something that I would like to accomplish, but right now I'm not there yet.
Yeah. Sure. And but you do keep a speaking schedule. Are you speaking various places or possibly in the future?
Oh, possibly in the future.
Okay.
I've been here in my office for about a year and a half now.
Right.
Yeah. But yes, I hope to get back out on the road soon.
Good. So this is the final question I have, which is just kind of a fun question, totally not related to interpreting, but during this question, everybody can start the process of getting questions to me for the Q&A time. And let me give a little bit, I guess, I'll go ahead and give the details on that before I ask this last question. So for Q&A, if you would, please direct message me your questions so they're not in the entire chat. If I don't read out your question, or if I don't call on you to read your question out, please don't be offended. I don't know how many questions I'll get coming in, so I'm going to kind of look at them and just pick. Keep questions please relevant to Dr. Patrie's work and what's happening for her and things that would be beneficial for the entire group. So just keep that in mind as well. So again, direct message me any questions that you have. And then what I would like to do is call out the people, call on the people who have given me a question that you'd like to give to Dr. Patrie. And then I will have you actually ask the question yourself. So you can go ahead and turn your video on, you can sign or speak your question, and that's how we'll do it. Hopefully that was clear. So you'll message me and then I'll call on you and then you'll ask the question to Dr. Patrie. Everybody good? All right, I hope so. I can't see anybody's videos, but so this last question, fun question for you, Carol, as we transition to Q&A. If you could spend a year doing absolutely anything you wanted to do, anything, no constraints on money or time or location, what would it be, and why would you spend your time doing that?
Oh gosh, let's see. Well, first of all, I would my top priority would be to spend more in-time person spoiling my grandchildren, and then I would like to take all of them, my children and my grandchildren, like to take them traveling, because I think travel really changes people. It helps you to get a broader perspective on what life is like other places, and I think that helps you, to be a good interpreter. I'd like to get down to my glass studio and work on those landscapes I was mentioning. Um, I probably would need 3 or 4 years, but so it would involve, the kids, working on my artwork. Um, I would like to write some more books. I haven't figured out which direction to go in. Um, Before writing new books, there are a number of projects still to be released, like that footage I told you about, and several others. And I just like an RSVP follow-up, more fingerspelled word recognition practice. So all these projects that have been, sitting around, I love to get those out. I just have so many things that I would want to do. I probably would keep you here till another hour telling you about all of those, but it would not be wasted time. I guarantee you. I would be traveling or writing more books or working on my class or working in my garden.
I love that. Okay, great. So we'll move into the Q&A time. We've already had several questions come in via direct message. If you still have questions that you'd like to ask, please direct message me. And so I would like to, and if you don't want to read your question aloud, if you prefer me to read it, you can just type that in your direct message to me. But Shirley, you had a great question there that you added message to me. Did you want to go ahead and either video and or audio on and ask that question? Shirley? Okay, Shirley says I can read it. Okay, so Shirley's question was about the Ball State University group that started RAD when RAD first became organized. The question is, were you a part of that group at that time?
No.
Okay.
No.
So obviously, though, at that time you were already in kind of the milieu of interpreting and interpreter education. So were you aware of some of these happenings, either rumblings or?
No, not at that time.
Okay.
No, not at that time. I was a high school student then. So I didn't get into interpreting until the late 60s. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. So we have several others here. A fun question from Cliff. Have you ever flown in a biplane?
No. I so have that on my bucket list, though. If you know someone that can give me a ride, please let me know.
I love it. Okay, and then another question from Cliff, another fun one. How many tattoos did your dad have, and what were they?
Oh, just that one, that butterfly one, just that butterfly on his right arm.
Awesome. Okay, here's a question from Tim. Tim, would you like to read or speak your question, or I can if you'd like me to, either way?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. 1 second. I wrote it down. Hold on. Sorry. Okay. So how much have deaf people been involved in your work, and how do we encourage or facilitate more deaf people to be involved with educating interpreters?
The first part of your question, well, Dawn Sign Press is a deaf-owned company. And so Joe Danis is the president, and many of the people that work at the company are deaf. So all of my work is filtered, through that lens. 50% of the videos that are part of EIS are created by deaf people. There was no input from me as to what they should say or how they should say it. It was just, I don't know how many deaf people wanting to express some information, and we videoed that and used it in the books. Let's see, your third part of the question was how to get more deaf people involved in teaching interpreting. I'm open to your suggestions. Please type them in the chat. That's a big question I think we all need to put our minds to. Like so many other questions along the way, we need groupthink, we need lots of ideas. I don't have the single answer, but I'm open to exploring that with as many of you as would like to. Did I answer all of your questions, Tim?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, wonderful. And next up, there's a question from Landon. Landon, would you like to read your question?
Can you hear me? Is that working?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Hi. First of all, thanks for being here. Really enjoyed listening to you talk. So going back to your example of when you were developing your curriculum and stuff, and you had to like backfill, right? And you had to constantly, almost reinvent yourself, like scrutinize your work and then scrutinize again. If I had to lend that like example of your experience to us as interpreters today and how, it's a constant personal development, how did you not go crazy? Like what what were some of the things or anecdotes or mantras in your head that, I mean, you didn't know where the end was, you knew you just started, So I'm just curious about that. I know it's a very broad question, but thank you.
Well, it's a good thing I didn't know where the end was because I never seemed to be able to get to it. So I kind of didn't know what I signed up for. I think it's because if I could pick one thing that gave me the ability to just keep going and looking, it's that other people seem to believe in me. Other people seem to think I could do it. And so I thought, well, if you think I can do it, who am I to doubt you? So I think that's an important thing for me to remember as an interpreter or an educator. Help me find the best in that person, because there's a lot to carry here in the field of interpreting. There's no one person can do this. We really need, to pass techniques and tips and questions to each other, encourage other people to take over. And one of the main reasons I wanted to develop the Effective Interpreting series is so that other people can teach and they can teach other people. So there's enough work to go around. There isn't necessarily enough help to go around. So
Right.
I just like to encourage other people to, pick up the baton, just, do your best, get help, pay it forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Question from Serena. Serena said she'd like for me to read that question. She said she loved your stories and pictures of your parents in childhood and was curious if you've ever written or are planning to write anything along the lines of a personal memoir.
Yes, I am working on that. There's a wonderful thing called Storyworth, and it's like a subscription, and they send you a question every week, and then you type up an answer and put in pictures, and then at the end of the year they make a book. It's just great. So I've been doing that, and also my dad did write up a little memoir of his own, which is, I think it's a fascinating read, but then it's my dad. But if any of you would like to read his story, I can, send you the link to the PDF and you can enjoy that. But I do think you raise a good point. It's very important to write down the challenges you faced, how you've met them, memories that, you might like to share with others. Someone else might see some solutions in what I wrote without my intending to teach that or anything. So I think it's really important, and I'm working on it.
And Dr. Patrie, speaking of your father's memoir, we do have some folks who would like to have access to that, and that's generous to offer that you would send that out. Because I have everybody's emails who registered for today's event, if you're comfortable with it, I would be happy to send the
Sure.
PDF to all participants today. Would you like me to do that?
Oh yeah, that would be great. Thank
Beautiful.
you.
So that's what I'll do, everybody. I'll make
Thanks.
sure to send that out after the workshop this afternoon. Okay, so we have a question from Grace. And she would like for me to read it. The question is, did you ever feel burnout along the way? You faced a lot of adversity, so it seems it would be easy to want to give up.
Oh, I didn't ever want to give up, but I did need a rest. I was very fortunate. I had a sabbatical when I was at Gallaudet, and the first 6 weeks of that sabbatical, I basically slept, like I had a morning nap and lunch, and then an afternoon nap, and then dinner, and then I go to bed early. So there were times when I needed a rest, and that really helped me. Like we were talking about deliberate practice, an important part of that is to stop doing what you're doing. You know, take your eyes off the page, you know, give yourself a rest to recharge. I never wanted to give up. I still don't have that feeling, but I now realize the importance of a little time to step back and do reflection, take a rest, think about something else. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
And a question from Rebecca, who would also like for me to read it. How do or did your parents feel about your work and your career? And do they understand the amazing impact that you had on the field? And then in parentheses, she says they should be amazingly proud.
They were very proud when I became an interpreter. Oh my gosh, they were very proud. They once had a party over at the house when this is when I was in Rochester very early. I was interpreting like a news thing or something on TV, and I was signing, you know, and my parents had this party and all their friends were only finger spellers. So they're all like watching TV to see me interpret on TV. And you could just see their faces fall. They're like, and they started finger spelling to each other like, oh, she used to be such a good interpreter, meaning she used to finger spell everything. So that was like, so that was interesting to me. My mom was really worried when I decided to retire from Gallaudet and devote myself full time to working on the effective interpreting series. She was like, oh, honey, you need to get a job. You can't make a living writing these books. So she was pretty worried about that, but I do think they were very proud, and they did let me know that for sure.
That's beautiful. Shirley asked if your brothers became interpreters as well.
No. The oldest one became a pilot, and the middle brother was a test engineer in Silicon Valley, developing, you know, computer chips.
Wow, interesting. This is actually a question from me. There are some more here, and if you still have questions, you can keep them coming, folks. Also, just a quick audio tag for the code word when you go to fill out your CEU form. It is the word legacy. Legacy, legacy. So again, if you have more questions, keep them coming. This is a question from me. I'm curious about either researchers or authors or textbooks that you feel have been influential or maybe particularly meaningful to you for some reason. What would those be?
Oh, I would probably always pick Daniel Gilles' work. Gile. He's French. He lives in Paris. His work has largely influenced mine. His work is theoretical. And when I read it, it just made perfect sense to me. And I wanted to take his ideas and put them into practice. So much of the effective interpreting series is based on his work. And he's become a friend over the years. We were lucky we got to go to Paris before the pandemic, and he took us on a walking tour. Oh my gosh, he walks so fast. I mean, he walks really fast, and we're in pretty good shape, but we were really struggling to keep up with him. And he said, oh, do you want to go up here and see the School of Engineering? And it was up a hill, and we're both like, no, we're good. We're good. So I really enjoyed knowing him, reading his work, keeping in touch with him. He's been probably the biggest single influence is his work, because he's a really good scholar. He really does his homework.
Right. And I feel like my limited perspective, that Gilles' work has become more influential in interpreting education, but specifically in educating, training interpreter educators as well. At least the program that I went through at the University of North Florida integrated his work, some of his papers and scholarship directly. So we did have a question from Barb, who asked about cochlear implants and what you thought about the impact of cochlear implants on just, I guess, the future of interpreting, and what, if any, impact do you think that might be making with cochlear implants?
Boy, that's an area I have not explored. I would like somebody to let me know. I don't have the answer to that. I
Okay.
really haven't delved into that literature. Sorry.
Okay, and here's another question from Cliff. He says, is there a good book that describes the history of the Rochester method and how it was developed?
Oh, let's see. Is there a good book? I don't know. I will look and I will get that to you. If I find, I will contact you, Josiah, with a more
Okay.
complete answer. The short answer is that the Rochester method is essentially an oral method. It was designed to allow deaf students to achieve the King's English. So it's really an oral method supported with fingerspelled letters. So it's technically an oral system, but I'll see what I can find for you.
Not know that. Thank you for that, Carol. Here's a question from Jessica. She'd like for me to read it as well. So for new and seasoned interpreters alike, what skill related to deliberate practice? So which skill for practice would you recommend would be a primary or maybe an initial focus that would make the biggest impact in maybe a short amount of time?
You might know my answer already. It's going to be fingerspelled word recognition. I feel that so many people lose their confidence. So many interpreters lose their confidence when they see, the hand coming up and they know it's going to be fingerspelling. Right away, there's a lot of anxiety. I see some people nodding. You're not alone. The minute you think you're going to watch fingerspelling, anxiety comes up, and then there's a big block, and then pretty soon you've lost the message. So if I had to pick one thing to recommend, it would be fingerspelled word recognition. The package that I designed, I mean, it's if another person had done this, I would still recommend studying the RSVP package. It was done by me and a co-author who's a linguist, and we're developing more practice materials for that. But, just to pick a very discrete thing that I know will lead to a good payoff, it's fingerspelled word recognition in that RSVP package. And that's just reading fingers. It's not doing it, just reading it, just picking a very discrete skill.
Thank you. Here's a question from Terry, who Terry would like for me to read this question as well. The dissatisfaction that deaf people express with interpreters often centers around ASL to English interpreting and interpreter fluency. Also, dialogue in the deaf community about interpreters contains a different way of thinking about interpreting. From the perspective of the experience of receiving interpreter-mediated communication, how do you envision future models of interpreting that bring in perspectives of the recipients of interpreting, the deaf community?
That's where we're headed. That's what we need to focus on next. We need to figure out, we need deaf people to help us teach. We need to get them involved, and the solutions for that, I can't generate the solutions for how to get deaf people involved, but we do need more deaf people involved in teaching, because it's the two languages, it's ASL and English. So for a long time, it's been primarily hearing interpreter educators, but that's really only half the story. So yeah, we're missing, the other half of the teaching team, if you will. And there is a lot of frustration, I've noticed, over time. I've noticed that deaf people may be frustrated with interpreters not understanding their ASL. That boils down to the very bottom level of the effective interpreting series. It's language proficiency, language comprehension in ASL. Just can't get around it, can't go over it. It's just, that's our number one job, is become more fluent, help other people become more fluent in ASL, including fingerspell word recognition. You know, I'm never going to get away from promoting fingerspell.
Yeah, wonderful. Here's a great question from Jamie about the effective interpreting series. Would you recommend reading all of these books, or using these books as a self-guided study for certified interpreters?
Yes, you could. You could pick. I would suggest starting at the blue level and working your way up to the green. Yes, each book has enough material that if you wanted to study on your own, you could earn 2 CEUs with me. I'm a RID sponsor, so if you want to earn CEUs for studying a book, I can help you do that. I would recommend the Teacher's Guide, because it's got more tips and information if you're studying alone.
Just to add my personal experience with the effective interpreting series, I've taught from them, and wasn't incredibly familiar before I started teaching from them, but just going through them myself was really revelatory for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just concur that going through them, for anybody who hasn't yet, for whatever reason, maybe you finished your ITP before they were used in your program, or they're not used in your program, they're worth every dollar you could spend on having these texts in your library. So I mean, I could not agree more on that end. Here's a question from Tim that Tim would like for me to read. Tim says, the ITP I graduated from is an associate's degree program, but they want it to become a bachelor's degree program. What can graduates or interpreters do to encourage this development? And what exact points did you emphasize when you were encouraging this years ago?
What I did years ago was I had to figure out how to be articulate, you know, using my own words to explain the importance of why interpreters need to be educated and fluent in languages. I found a lot of support in looking in the field of spoken language interpreting, because there those things are a given. And they have entrance exams and fluency requirements. So I didn't necessarily try to reinvent the wheel. There already is justification out there, primarily in spoken language interpreting. And what was the first part of that question again?
It was, how can graduates and interpreters encourage the development of, I guess, upgrading programs from associate's levels to bachelor level programs?
A couple of things are happening sort of at broader levels, more systemic levels. The CCIE, the group that accredits, is now, you know, thinking more of not accrediting AA programs. Some are already accredited. So there's, you know, some influence happening at that level of accreditation. And then also RID's requirements for taking the test, for sitting for the test, requires a bachelor's. So there's pressure from other systems that will be changing that, I think. It's, there were so many more associates programs than bachelor's programs that it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while to get that shift done, you know. And good education happens in both places, you know. It's just going to take a while to get that paradigm completely shifted.
Absolutely, thank you. Another question from Barb was wondering what college you attended before interpreting at Ntid.
Oh, I was attending the State University of New York at Geneseo, Geneseo, and I was studying audiology and speech pathology, because I wanted to work with little deaf kids and help them acquire language. And my department chair said, no, you can't sign with deaf kids. You're meant to talk, you're meant to help them speak. So it didn't work out too well. However, they did give me a free ride, full scholarship, tuition, everything, to earn a master's in that same field. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in audiology and speech pathology, which I have never used, not even one day. But it gave me enough of a academic background, enough science, that I was able to easily enter a doctoral program. So it benefited me, I just not in the way I thought.
Thank you. And Aaron was wondering if we are able to purchase the access to the RSVP curriculum program on Dawn Sign Press's website.
Yes. You'll find it there. And I see a question in the chat. Somebody has a VHS. And yes, if you have an older version, you can just contact Dawn Sign Press. If you have the VHS or the DVD, I'm pretty sure they'll give you access to the digital version. Just call customer service there.
Wonderful. Well, that concludes our Q&A time. Thank you, everybody, for your questions, really thoughtful questions. And of course, for Dr. Patrie's answers, really insightful and enlightening. And again, just as we wrap up today, to contextualize this afternoon's conversation, I was honored to have you, Carol, spend time with us this afternoon. I know that we have much to learn from those who have gone before and have blazed the trails in interpreting and interpreter education. And I say that, with all seriousness. The temptation is always there to just look forward and forget where we've come from and the work that people have done to get us where we are today. And so for me, I'm inspired and instructed by not only the things that you've produced, like, textbooks and programs, but also the values and the principles that you adopted as part of your work as you led in interpreting. So I appreciate that very much. So thank you again. Can't thank you enough. I do want to thank everybody for participating this afternoon. Really appreciate every single one of you for joining this afternoon and spending time together. I certainly hope that you benefited from it and that you have things that you can take along with you. Again, I do want to remind everybody, I will send out the PDF of Stanley Patrie's autobiography to everybody who signed up for today's workshop. I do want to also one last time mention that the code word when you go to fill out your CEU form, because inevitably somebody misses it, the code word is legacy, L-E-G-A-C-Y. You'll put that on the form. If for some reason you forget, just shoot me an email and I'll help you. Again, you'll receive a form or you'll receive an email with a link to 2 forms 30 minutes after this workshop commences. And those are the links you'll need to have to fill out the forms for CEUs and also to give feedback formally for RID. So if you'd like to do that, you're able to do that. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Patrie, for joining us this afternoon, for sharing your wisdom and insight. And before we wrap, I do want to say, are there any final thoughts that you want to leave us with today?
Oh, thank you. I have one other thing there. I just want to say thank you to everyone who came and spent a couple of hours with us today. Thank you, Josiah, for all your organization and for running such a great meeting today. Thank you to the interpreters. And just, I'm just so grateful to have a chance to talk. And, if you have one takeaway, I hope that part of your takeaway will be that no one person can do it. We all really need each other to work together. The whole point is to be able to provide communication access, and no one person has all the answers. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.